If you think about the things you keep secret, is banking information on that list? Or are you more like...
I have had somebody share a bank password with me. Yes, a parent.
And are you nervous admitting that because, you're not supposed to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that really should have to happen.
Who knew secret passwords weren't so secret? Hi, I'm Paul Haavardsrud. Welcome to The Cost of Living. Now, you'd never share your online bank passwords, right? Not you. Well, look to your left, look to your right. The numbers show at least one of you trusting souls isn't telling the truth. Also today, the threat of tariffs has exposed a lot of this country's economic vulnerabilities. Okay, fine, we know we can do better. So, let's get some big ideas on the table and start fixing things. Up first, our dollar has dipped to a 20-year low. And we know Canada's economy has its work cut out for it. A weak loonie isn't helping, but at least it's not all bad news. The Canadian dollar's been taking a beating for a while. It's down to a 20-year low. And now there's tariffs, which are actually bringing a new twist to a weaker dollar. Like, tariffs are designed to hurt Canadian exports. But since they're also pushing our dollar down, that can actually help those same exporters. Laura Thompson started a cosmetics company, Three Ships Beauty, out of the kitchen of a one-bedroom apartment. And from the beginning,
as soon as we launched our store, we had our products shippable to the US. The US is just such a massive market. It's more than 10 times larger than the Canadian market is. It's where all the large consumer goods companies are, especially within beauty. They all have headquarters out of the States. And so in order for you to be considered a big player within the skincare space, you need to be sold in the US.
The bigger they got, the more they shipped south of the border, and the more attention Laura paid to exchange rates. Every time the Canadian dollar dropped, she made a bit more money. Like, over the last few years, the loonie's gone from 80 cents to 70. That's a 13% drop. And it's meant every dollar she makes in the US is worth 13% more than it was just a couple years ago. That's the kind of sweet little foreign exchange gain that exporters love. And before tariffs came along, at least, it had her thinking,
we need to start shifting more of our business into US because then we'll make more Canadian dollars off of that. And for us, the majority of our costs are in Canadian dollars because we manufacture all of our products except for two in Canada. So it makes us want to scale up our US revenue.
Now, she couldn't be happier that 3/4 of their sales are still in Canada. But what about the 25% that still goes south? For exporters, like Three Ships Beauty, a lower loonie could actually take the edge off tariffs.
Exchange rates do tend to function as something like a shock absorber, right? When the exchange rate falls, we tend to see, Canadian exporters start to receive more, essentially Canadian dollars for every product that they're selling, into global markets.
Carl Shimada is the chief market strategist at Corpay. He says the loonie shock absorber is at least one silver lining of a lower dollar. It will blunt the sting of tariffs. That goes for cosmetics makers and for big oil companies selling hundreds of thousands of barrels a day. So that's the good news. And at least we have that. Because when you step back and look at what a lower dollar says,
the Canadian dollar is a barometer for views on where the Canadian economy will go in the long run. And it's clearly been trading down for years. The reality here is that, Canada became too dependent on housing-related investment. It became not productive enough, and then it eventually got hit by these tariffs. And so, investors are expressing a very negative view on Canada through the exchange rate.
our falling dollar is the global currency market's way of saying, We see you, Canadian economy, and we don't really dig your style. Now, tariffs are pushing our dollar even lower. Part of the reason, tariffs could actually cut the literal demand for Canadian dollars. You can think about it like this. Every time a Canadian company sells something in the US, it earns American dollars. When it brings those dollars home, it needs to convert them to Canadian dollars. The act of doing that creates demand for our currency. More of that kind of demand, and the loonie goes up. But tariffs, of course, would mean less demand. And this is why even the threat of tariffs has helped push the loonie down to 69 cents. How much further could our dollar drop from here? Well, Carl says predicting currency markets is a mug's game. But if we do get tariffs, and they stick around, he says less demand for our dollar could send it into the 66-cent range. Maybe even lower.
Currency markets do tend to overshoot. They are, ultimately composed of human beings. Human beings tend to herd in one direction or the other. We tend to stampede. And when that happens, the exchange rate can move quite a long way beyond where its fundamental value should be. So, when I say that the exchange rate could fall to around 66 cents, it could easily overshoot that if we get a, extreme, crippling sense of fear in currency markets.
Yeah, we're going to want to avoid that crippling sense of fear. If the loonie does drop like that, that would be an anchor on the economy. Anything we import would become more expensive. All the machinery and raw materials that our businesses buy from the rest of the world would cost more. At the household level, so would all of our food, clothes, computers.
If we do see, a massive shock for a prolonged period of time, we could see a rise in unemployment, even above the rates that we're at right now. We could see Canadian consumers being forced to pull back on their spending, and we would ultimately see a much slower Canadian economy.
And we're not there yet. And we don't know how tariffs will play out. Every day seems to bring something different. So maybe we get full-blown tariffs, maybe we don't. Either way, Canada knows our economy needs to get on a better track. And for our dollar, so does the world's perception of our economy.
If we were to take this tariff shock, to take the damage that has happened in recent years as a wake-up call, if we were to turn that around and to work, more to reduce interprovincial trade barriers, for example, to increase productivity, to reform our tax code, currency markets would interpret those moves in a favorable light, right? And the Canadian dollar would start to rally back.
If we give currency markets a reason to think differently about Canada, Carl says they will change their tune. And yeah, tariffs going away wouldn't hurt. Until that happens, Laura Thompson at Three Ships Beauty says she's happy to stay in Canada, making Canadian dollars.
The Canadian market is still huge. There's lots of untapped potential within Canada. We're fine to ride this out for as long as it takes and just focus on growing our Canadian presence.
Another silver lining. More sugar crystal vanilla lip exfoliator for us. On your radio and by podcast, this is The Cost of Living. I'm Paul Haavardsrud. Your banking password, by definition, is a secret code. You keep it to yourself for a good reason. It's the gateway to your financial life. You even sign a contract saying you understand bad things can happen if you share it. If we all know this, why do so many Canadians know each other's passwords?
I just started this. It's a scrappy quilt, basically.
About once a week, Priscilla Buchanan drops into this sewing club just outside of Halifax. She's comfortable here, behind a sewing machine, but now she's trying her hand at another technology, online banking.
No, well, my husband started doing it, and then he passed away, so I continued, and it's very challenging sometimes.
Priscilla says she's pretty good at paying her bills and checking her balance, But once in a while, she needs help. So she shares the password to her online bank accounts with her son.
Passwords are one of the most important things that you do share with somebody you can trust.
According to an RBC survey from 2020, more than half of Canadians share their bank card PINs or online passwords.
Which is a really big amount of folks out there who are sharing this extremely sensitive information that is essentially the keys to your financial accounts.
Jeff Morton is in charge of fraud strategy at RBC. He says it's often people like Priscilla, seniors who need help with their online accounts. But not always.
No, we certainly see it affecting all demographics, in younger generations sharing with parents or with friends. So it's certainly not something that targets only the senior citizens.
But Jeff says it's a bad idea no matter who you are. Sharing passwords with people who are not named on your account violates your service agreement. If money goes missing, the bank won't help you. And in the case of fraud,
it could mean that you are now liable for those fraud transactions and are no longer guaranteed the reimbursement for that from the bank.
The bank is not going to do anything to help you. They're not going
Celine Latulip teaches computer science at the University of Manitoba. She knows it's risky to share passwords, but
I have had somebody share a bank password with me. Yes, and a parent.
And are you nervous admitting that because, you're not supposed to do that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that really should have to happen.
But Celine says there aren't a lot of good options. You can sign up for a joint account, but she says that's really only suitable for people in committed relationships who share their financial assets. And if you don't fall into that category, things can get dicey.
Joint accounts also mean that the person who becomes joint also takes on any debts. So if the older adult suddenly goes into negative balance, well, that affects the credit rating of the person who's become a joint account holder, right? So there's responsibilities that come with that may not be desired.
Celine says a better idea would be to do what they've done in the UK and India. Offer what's known as proxy accounts. Seniors who need a little help with their online banking can give someone limited access to their accounts using a separate password. So a caregiver could be allowed to pay bills, but have limits on how much they withdraw.
And so, proxy accounts would allow the older adult to decide, what is it that I want to be able to get help with, and how much access do I want to give this person? And that then really sets a limit on how much damage could be done if the person who's given access decides to act nefariously.
As for Priscilla Buchanan, she says she's not too concerned about sharing her passwords. She trusts her son.
I still call him when I need assistance.
And she's getting better at online banking. Her latest step, switching to automated bill payments.
Because sometimes they forget to pay them.
For The Cost of Living, I'm Blair Sanderson.
This is The Cost of Living. I'm Paul Haavardsrud. Here are some things we know Canada doesn't have going for us. Number one, tariffs. No surprise there. But Trump's tariff threat is also making it tough to avoid some other problems. Our economic productivity has been sliding for more than 20 years. Businesses aren't investing as much. Our economy is kind of stuck in neutral. Now, the good thing is we know all that. So, enough of where we are. To look at where we could go, we're joined by Daniel Dubois. He's a founding member of Build Canada. It's a new group that's trying to push big ideas that can help the country's economy. And Robert Asselin. He's the head of policy at the Business Council of Canada. Hi there.
Hi. It's good to be with you.
Daniel, let me start with you. How are you feeling about where Canada's at right now?
I'm still very optimistic and positive about Canada. This is and will continue to be the greatest country on the planet. We have enormous assets. We have enormous talent, people, resources. So I'm optimistic for sure. But it's time to get busy. It's very Canadian. We got to go give her. This is the time.
Love it. All right, we're going to give her. Robert, we keep hearing over and over, let's not let a crisis go to waste. It's almost a cliche by now. So if we were going to use this tariff crisis to spur us to make changes, what would be number one on your wish list?
Well, the number one thing is remove the barriers we've put on ourselves, on our growth. And those are self-inflicted, I would say, regulatory in nature. And I know this sounds like technocratic or boring, but it's very important because this is how investors decide to put money in the economy, whether it's complicated or not to do these investments, how long it takes to get a permit, for example, to build a new project, a new mine. That would be kind of the first order, but then really move what I would call our growth model, which is really based on consumption and real estate right now, to a very dynamic one based on innovation and what I would call strategic industries where there's a lot of productivity gains to be had. So this is the first big move I would do.
What kind of strategic industries?
Well, the ones where advanced economies compete in. So ag tech, biotech, energy technology, where the world competes and where Canada has competitive advantage, in my opinion, but where we've been very complacent because we have natural resources. We had before, I guess, a few months ago, a reliable trading partner down south. And we haven't been really intentional about developing a key innovation strategy, I would say, in these sectors to push us forward.
All right. Daniel, what about you? Is there one big idea you could, pull out of your mind right now that you think could really help?
I think we've got lots of big ideas. I do think Robert's right on track that we have to get out of our own way. We have a lot of resources. We have a lot of projects that can be built that themselves will spur economic growth, but also start to help us sell our products, one of which is oil and petroleum products. So that's number one. But we shouldn't shy away from another thing that drives innovation and productivity, and that is competition, right? People definitely like to build cool things, but at the end of the day, people build and innovate mostly because they don't want to lose their customer or because they want to win a new customer. And if the competitive environment is such that businesses across our economy are protected from competition, then we have less innovation, we have less productivity. And so this is a trade-off that we have to make. Remember, we said big choices. The big idea is I think we have to become a more competitive society. And that means our businesses are better at coming up with new products and selling them in other places. That's a really important word. And there are levers the government has to improve that competitiveness. Some of them is subsidy policy, which we do a lot of. Some of it is tax policy, which we can use as a lever to drive the kind of investment and behavior. And some of it is regulatory.
Robert, if we just look at this idea of competition and bringing down barriers to competition, like Daniel mentioned there, what do you think about that?
Well, competition is important. Competitive markets are key to innovation. What I would add maybe to what Daniel is saying is, if you look at manufacturing as a share of GDP, it has never been so low in Canada in modern history. And the reason for that is, in my opinion, we have not put together the ecosystem necessary to be a productive economy, to do a production economy, which means building things and products. And so in order to do that, you need businesses who invest in R&D. You need higher level of public R&D, government spending in R&D, research and development. But you also need a system in which these ideas can be transferred to products, commercialization. And that we have been really bad at. We have to be more conscious of the value of these intellectual products we are creating and trying to keep them here in Canada.
All right, can you give me an example of something that you think we could build here?
I can give you examples of what we had and we let go. We used to have a company called Nortel in Canada. It was one of the best in microelectronics, which is foundational to innovation in everything we see right now, especially in semiconductors. We let that engineering STEM capacity go away. We let these amazing talent go work elsewhere. And as a result, maybe 30 years later, we're trying to rebuild some of that in the foundations of emerging industries. And so the idea of having talent is important, but you have to mobilize these talent in these verticals, and that companies can grow out of it. And I think these mechanisms, these bridge I would qualify between universities and corporations have not been built in a way that they should have been built in other countries. And this is why, for example, I've been a big fan of the DARPA model in the US, where the government kind of mobilizes private sector actors, researchers, and kind of try to solve concrete industrial problems so that companies can adopt them and grow and scale as a result of them, you know?
You know, I do say I appreciate the emphasis on innovation and growth, but I just think it's really important that we understand that the thing that really makes that happen, the actor, is entrepreneurs themselves, and that we should think a lot. And also the people who build it. You talk about losing talent. I mean, every day we lose talent from some of our great technical universities, Waterloo, University of Toronto, Montreal, and people are leaving because they think they can have a better future somewhere else. They think they can make more money. They think there's a better atmosphere. They think they have more access to capital. And I think we should be honest about that, okay, we need to figure out that making money and encouraging these builders as kind of, that's a Canadian behavior. Let's talk about that. That's actually pretty important. And we also have to just recognize a taxation system. And this is maybe a bold idea. I'll throw this out. Right now, we tax people on capital gains, and there's a big debate about it. But we also invest tens of billions of dollars in direct industrial subsidies, whether it's SRED or IRAP. You know, one bold, crazy thing we could do is we could cut our capital gains dramatically to make this the best place in the world to invest, certainly best in North America. And we could stop subsidizing so much. We could offset the loss of tax by simply stop subsidizing businesses as much. And I'm not just talking about tech companies, I'm talking about oil subsidies, I'm talking about across the board. That is a sort of a new bargain that we should be thinking about for the country to become hyper-competitive in a global world that's hyper-competitive. And I just want to also say one thing that's really important. When people hear me say that, I think, or hear people like me say that, they get nervous. I think the trick for Canada is to stop subsidizing companies and start subsidizing people. Right? We need to make it okay for companies to fail. That's going to happen in a very good competitive market, and make sure that individuals, you know, I saw a shocking thing the other day. Canadians rank #1 in the world, would you believe, on fear of failure in starting a new company. #1. And this was a private piece of data that someone shared with me, so I can't cite it yet. But, you know, that was shocking to me because they feel really good about their skills and abilities, but we have to make it okay to fail in business through our social safety net. But we should stop maybe subsidizing as much of the businesses so that we get to the dynamic, innovative economy that Robert articulated, and I completely agree is what we need to have.
Something you both mentioned is the role of government. If you look at other countries right now, a lot of other countries, including the U.S., they're taking a more active hand in things. They're sort of stepping up with different industrial policies. Canada, not so much. Do you think there's room for a kind of industrial policy in this country at this moment?
So I would say that this is an important question, but my answer to that is not to ask whether there should be a lot of government intervention or not, no intervention at all. The question, are those the right intervention? And I think this is where we're failing in terms of our industrial policies, that, to Daniel's point, subsidies to companies, we have seen anemic R&D, public and private R&D numbers, anemic business investment numbers. So for all the evidence that we got, SRED and all these programs and the subsidies we keep putting into companies are not producing a more productive economy. So in the way we do industrial policy, I think has to be improved dramatically. And my personal opinion is we have to be more targeted in sectors where there's a lot of productive growth to be had. As I said, I spoke about a few I thought were important. And then really focusing on de-risking R&D, which is very expensive, a big risk for companies, and focusing on technology, development and design, as I spoke, as opposed of, you know, giving a lot of money to companies, foreign companies, to come assemble things in Canada. This is not the way we're going to grow an economy.
Daniel, what about
Paul,
you? Yeah, what about you? How do you come down?
Well,
on
look, I think we can't be in a world of like eyes closed, laissez-faire economics in the world where we have nation state competition and clearly people are being favored. So it's good to be a Boy Scout, but not if everyone else is a gangster. That's kind of crazy.
Robert, we've talked about a lot of ideas so far. We've kind of been all over the map in terms of the things that we've been discussing. Do you sense a willingness, given the threat that we face from the U.S. right now, to actually move these things from, hey, let's talk about high-speed rail or IP or whatever it is, and then actually get some of this stuff done?
I actually think that one of the big problems that we have on policymaking is execution. Execution in Canada has been really, really bad at all levels, I would say. And I hope this moment of crisis forces us to see people and governments start executing much better and stop with the short-term partisan politics, focus on these objectives, be consistent, stop changing budget teams every year, keep at it. Economic growth is something you build over time. Innovation is something you build over time. We don't have the luxury of having our eyes focused on the short-term political partisan stuff. This is the time, I called it the Sputnik moment for Canada, to be focused on the agency that we have to change things for good.
Daniel, what about you? We call it a Sputnik moment. Do you agree?
Yeah, I think we're faced with a significant threat, and it's not just what's happening south. The whole world is changing. Technology is changing, and it's changing at a rate that is really hard for a stable, slow Canada, which is what we've been. It's been part of our deal to adapt to, but we have to adapt. We can take this moment and we can make hard choices and reorient ourselves, prioritize what's really important to grow together as a country.
All right, we tend to be the tortoise. We'll see if we can be the hare, because we might need to run pretty fast here. Thanks to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
That was Daniel Dubeau. He's a founding member of Build Canada and a former executive at Shopify. And Robert Asselin, the Vice President of Policy at the Business Council of Canada. That's all for the show. The Cost of Living is based in Calgary. The show is produced by Daniel Nerman, Blair Sanderson, and Jennifer Keane, with help from Jeff Kynock. I'm Paul Haavardsrud. Thanks for listening.